So let's start looking at the do once pattern. So this was designed in order to avoid processing the same piece of data multiple times. So examples of this that we've used this in are for when you have an e-commerce solution. Maybe you've got something like a Shopify store and you want to send that over to your ERP or to your warehouse management system. Now, in order to prevent those orders from being processed multiple times, or maybe sending duplicate versions of those orders through to those back-end systems, you've got to start thinking about how you do that. And that's why we invented the do once pattern. So let's take a quick look at how this works. So let's create a new workflow. And what you will have is some form of trigger, and we're just going to have a manual trigger for now. Let's just call it trigger. Now this could be a webhook, it could also be something that you run every hour just to check if there's any new orders to process. However you do it, you'll need a trigger. Then what you're going to want to do is connect up to your, for instance, your Shopify store and go and get some data. Now to simulate that, I'm just going to keep things really simple. I'm going to use one of the out-of-the-box N8N nodes just to say get data, and you will have some sort of JSON that comes back from those systems typically, and maybe it's got an order ID in there, and that's all we care about right now. It will obviously have lots more data in there, such as the details of the order in that case, but right now we just care about the order ID. So we'd have something like this that comes out of your source system. Then you would in some way process that data. Maybe you'd do some translations on it, whatever that might be, and then you'd send that information over to the ERP to get processed, for example. Again, I'm just going to simulate that with just a simple code node right now, and I'm just going to say process data. Okay, so we've triggered, got some data, we're processing the data, and that's kind of it. So I'm going to stick a do nothing on the end of this because it's just something I like to do. And I'm just going to say we're finished. So that's the end of the workflow. So it's really clear that that's the process. So how do we stop this from being processed multiple times? So if I execute this workflow, you'll see that every step in the workflow is processed once. If I execute it again, I can see that it's also processed a second time and a third and a fourth and a fifth, and it will always process the same piece of data. So that's something we want to avoid doing. So how does 8kit solve that? Well, let's go to the 8kit dashboard. So your dashboard will look something like this. And the way that we do this is we create a new unique, and let's give that a name. Let's say, in this case, orders, okay? So I'm going to put a little description in here which says, checks which orders have been processed. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So this is what's keeping track of this. If I go back to N8N, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an N8N action here, an 8kit action. And if I go in here, I will see check if the value exists in a unique. Really simple. Does this value exist? Now the collection I just created was called orders. If I go back, you can see that I've got a collection called orders. And the value, I'm just going to drag that order ID in there. So this is the thing I want to track. Have we processed this order before? Okay. So we got a yes and a no that comes out of this. So if we've already processed it before, I don't want to process that again. So I'm going to remove that connection there. And I'm going to just move that down there. So there you have our new step in the workflow. So we trigger, we get the data, we check if we've already processed it. If we haven't, no, then we do want to process it, and then we're finished. Okay, so that's great. So if we have already processed it though, I just kind of want to finish straight away. I don't want to process that data, and that's the first step of the pattern. So let's execute this workflow. So of course, we've now processed it for the first time. If I execute again, you see it's still saying it's processed. And that's because there's another piece of information that we need to let 8kit know about. So you've got to make sure that you tell 8kit when it has been successfully processed. So let's do that. So let's add into here another 8kit action, which is to add a value to that collection. So remember the collection name was orders, and the order ID is the one we're interested in. So let's take a look at what this looks like now. So what we have is we trigger, we get the data, we check if the value exists in the collection. So check if we've actually processed it. So let's make that easy to understand. Have we processed this before? Then we process the data, and then what we're doing by adding the add value to unique, we're actually saying successfully processed. So register this data as being processed. So that's the workflow as it stands. Get the data. Have we processed it? Yes, no. If we haven't processed it, once it's been successfully processed, log the fact we've processed it and finish. So let's take another look at this now then. So if we run this, it will, for the first time, go through. We've processed this before. No. Process the data. Register we've processed it. We finished. Execute a second time. We get the data. Have we processed this before? Yes. We skip this whole step. And what we see inside 8kit is we see, if we look in the orders, we now see we have a unique value in there. So let's take a quick look at that. Our order 1234 was processed, in this case a few seconds ago, at this time, and we can actually then go and do some debugging and tracking if we've got any issues with that. But it's really that simple. So if we then go back and ask for another order, let's say 1235, and we execute the workflow, it's not processed this order before, so it will go ahead and process that data. Once it's been successfully processed, it will add the fact that we've actually processed this into 8kit. If we take a look at 8kit, we see that we've now processed order 1235. And then when we execute this again, it skips the processing, only ever processes it once, and goes straight to the finish. And this stays here as a record to show when we actually process the order. So again, for audit purposes, you've got that all that data. And that is effectively the do once pattern. You drop a node in to do a check, and at the end of a successful processing run, you actually register that you've actually finished processing, and it will never get processed ever again as long as you've got these two checks around your processing data. And that is the do once pattern.